This is the Final Word Cricket Podcast. It's season 14. It's episode 35. It's the tail end of August. Jeff Lemon and Adam Collins with you. And Adam, you are speaking to me from Scotland.
Yes, I am.
Specifically in Edinburgh, and you are up there to do a lot of Final Words, Scotland, Lord's Taverners, cricket playing, all the rest of it over the next few days.
More specifically, I'm in Abs's living room, who's one of our kind listeners who's been a big part of the fun here when we all met for the half marathon earlier this year. I've just presented him with his baggy blue, his Final Word cap, which we've made up for the game tomorrow night against one of his teams. I described them the other day as the electric flamingos. I've also described them in dispatches as the Edinburgh flamingos. They're actually the eccentric flamingos who are playing tomorrow night. So just to get the specifics right there. So we've got a Final Word 11 taking the field at 6 p.m, which is possible here in Scotland because of the light being light for longer, if you like. Poorly explained, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yep, Joe Root will be very happy with that.
Yeah, and then we have the Tabs game, the Scottish Tabs against the 40s club on Wednesday, which we've got 4 representatives playing for the Scottish Taverners after my frolic with them last Friday at Arundel. So I'm feeling very tabby at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're sort of flipping back and forth. You're sometimes a taverner, sometimes trying to take them down. You're a fifth column. You're a turncoat. You're the Billy Midwinter of the Lord's Taverners.
Quite, yeah. Although it is good that we were able to sort of do with what we're doing at the moment with them having, it feels like we've come full circle with the summer, right? So I came up here on Bank Holiday weekend at the end of May, which was the weekend before the Ireland Test match. And, you and I, from that point forward, had our foot down at 100 mile an hour all the way through June and July. And let's be honest, most of August too. And we're nearing the end of August Bank Holiday weekend, which is the symbolic end of summer. So I feel like I've capped the season pretty well here in this part of the world. Whenever I walk around in Edinburgh, Jeff, I'm like, I wish to live here. I wish for this to be the place that one day I set up shop. It'll never happen, but it is gorgeous. And we'll enjoy some fringe shows, and I'll make this Scottish special at some point through tomorrow. I've got a bunch of interviews lined up for that. So it's pretty complicated terrain, Scottish cricket at the moment. So I'm a little bit daunted by this, but it'll all be all right on the night.
The Teshwa Pujara episode, that interview went up yesterday or a couple of days ago. By the time people will be listening to this, the Grace Harris interview is there as well. So we've been enjoying people's feedback on those. The Daniel Norcross Storytime episode. There's been a lot of stuff going up in the feed post-Ashes. Through that period, that June-July period, we had 2 million people listen, or 2 million listens to the Final Word across the Ashes. So it's a pretty wild sort of time that we're living in at the moment, and we're keen to keep making as many different kinds of shows as we can in this couple of months when we don't have a major series or tournament that we have to be at in order to, flex our muscles in different departments, show the breadth of what we can do. And if you found the show recently, then you might not have realised that we do quite as many different styles of program as we actually make.
That's it. And the Pujara interview has already been picked up by all the various cricket websites and Indian news sites as well, with him fairly adamant that he's not retiring from Test cricket. I think that both of us, and Brat as well, fell into the trap of believing that he might have actually retired when left out of the Windy squad earlier this year, a couple of months ago, whatever it worked out to be. But no, he's determined to get back, and he makes that point pretty strongly. Also rather strident on the pitches in India. We kind of speculated on commentary that maybe, if you're Virat Kohli or Rohit Sharma or Cheteshwar Pujara, these senior players in the Indian Test lineup, you might be a little bit shitty that you kept getting dished up pitches that in all probability are going to see matches end in, no more than 4 days, but probably inside 3 days. And it took him a while when I asked him about that, but he did accept the premise of the question that he wants to see a better balance between bat and ball when playing at home. And good on him for saying that. As a senior player, I think he's earned the right to say what he reckons about these types of matters. And I'm sure that'll be picked up as a news point in the days to come as well.
We've also had a bunch of people trying to work through a challenge that was inadvertently set on the show in the last few days, which is, can you link player to player back through Test cricket history in the fewest possible steps while going through every country that has played Test cricket? And there have been some pretty creative solutions to this, some interesting stuff popping up. One interesting one from Xavier Voigt-Hill, who detoured away from first-class cricket into List A cricket and has discovered the James Anderson overlap with Derek Randall, which is an extraordinary thing in itself.
Oh, this is crazy. I mean, I reckon, over the years, Jeff, on the Guardian live blog, we've talked about this in so many different ways, and Daniel and I went through this on Storytime, as you say. But Derek Randall, at age 49, representing Suffolk, a minor county, in a competition that was known as the National Westminster Bank Trophy in 2000. So the first round of that included the minor counties, and they were playing the Lancashire Cricket Board. I assume that's what it was. It must have been a knockout where the minor counties were included. And yeah, Derek Randall opened the batting against James Anderson in the May of 2000. So, and the better still, it was Anderson's list day debut. And it was Randall's final list day game. And he played his first list day game some 29 years before in 1971. So, we're talking about players overlapping. I don't think it gets much better than someone who had a 29-year list day career, finishing at 49 for a minor county, to pal up with Anderson, who's still going strong in, year 24 of his own professional career. And by the sounds of things, from hearing Jimmy talk on commentary in the last few days, he's got no intention of retiring. So the two of those players in just list day cricket alone. I know Anderson hasn't played in that format for probably 2 seasons, but still, their careers overlapping the way they have. That was an unexpected joy. And another one from Philip Cornwall. We mentioned the Guardian live blog. He's been the man at the Guardian who's employed us to do that job for many years now, Jeff. He said that back in 2004, he wrote an article for the paper doing basically something similar to what we've been doing in this little exercise. How's this? W.G. Grace played with Wilfred Rhodes, who played against George Headley, who played against Fred Truman, who played against Bill Lawry, who played against John Tracos. Now, John Tracos, of course, played for South Africa before they were booted out of international cricket, and returned to play for Zimbabwe on the other side of that ban. He played Test cricket against both Bill Lawry and Sachin Tendulkar, who of course played against a whole bunch of players who are still going around at the moment. So all of those links are through Test cricket. So that's gold dust, I reckon.
So that's 8. That's 8 steps from Grace through to now, which is...
Through to anyone, really. Nathan Lyon played against Tendulkar. Sure. Steve Smith played against Tendulkar. There's a number of them, right? So I think my way of doing it with a couple of Pakistanis and a couple of players that represented 2 countries was more exotic. But I love the use of John Tracos. And our Nerd Pledge CSI group have been diligently working on this behind the scenes, trying to find a way through every country using only one player.
Yeah.
And the creative use of South Africa, because, they played so early. Is there a way of getting to, a 4th country using South Africa before World War One? So anyway, all the fun of the fair. That's how that's what we do in our spare time.
I don't think it counts to use a player who's played for 2 countries. That doesn't knock off 2 countries. It has to be the country they were playing for at the time. And I wonder, nobody's used Yunus Khan yet, because he would have been playing in that Ireland match at Malahide. And he goes back a very long way. I'm just throwing that out there. He would have played against some very early Bangladesh and Zimbabwe teams, for instance. That might be useful to you along the way. Now, New Zealand playing against the UAE. This is where I want to start the show this week, because they lost a match, New Zealand, to the United Arab Emirates team, who've been... I mean, you wouldn't necessarily say on the rise, but they've had these signs. They've had these moments. They had moments in the T20 World Cup qualifying period. They had moments in the 2015 50 over World Cup. Yep. Frankly, before, players of that era, a couple of them were involved in sports betting problems and all of the rest of it. It's a curious one. Like, yes, it's a T20, not an ODI, so it doesn't hold a whole lot of relevance for the 50 over World Cup coming up. But New Zealand win the first and the third games in that series, not by big margins. They're fairly well held in those games. All 3 are played at Dubai. But they got soundly beaten in the second game, which feels significant. So New Zealand make 142 for 8, didn't bat well. It was Mark Chapman who was the one who dug them out of trouble and got them up to that score of 142. He made 63 or 46. No one else made many. Ayan Khan, the 17-year-old left-arm orthodox spinner, player of the match, dismissed 3 of the top 4. And Mohammad Jawadullah, the left-arm seamer, took 2 for 16 off 4 overs. And then they chased it in a canter, 3 wickets down. In the 16th over, Mohammad Wasim, whose work we enjoyed so much in that T20 World Cup qualifier when he gave himself the ball to bowl the 20th over at one point, and it didn't pan out so well. But good with the bat, 55 off 29 balls, Asif Khan 48 not out off 29, and played a bit more conservatively up to the last couple of overs where he went for it late in the piece. So against a good bowling attack, Southey, Jameson, Santner, Neesham, it feels like a result with some significance in terms of UAE being able to compete at the higher level.
Yeah, totally. First things first, Mohammed Wasim, it did pay off him bowling that 20th over, Jeff. Remember, he got David Visa out from Namibia, which gave the UAE the victory and kicked Namibia out of the competition. So it was a dead rubber for the UAE, but had a lot on the line for Namibia, and it was Mohammed Wasim then. But yeah, you look at someone like Ayan Khan, and this is where it gets interesting, right? So we make a lot of the ILT20 being... I'm not going to say a bad thing. That's the wrong word. That's the wrong descriptor. But it presenting a challenge, a rather sophisticated challenge for players, administrators, decision makers around the world. Well, Ayan Khan plays in that ILT20 as one of the locals. Remembering there are fewer locals in each side. Yeah. The records don't count towards, say, your Crick Info profile because the games are being played in an associate nation. But for the UAE players, they're able to benefit from playing against some of the best T20 cricketers in the world. Take David Warner, who, because of the way this release has gone out this morning from the ILT20, because the Big Bash is finishing on January the 26th this year, I think it is, it means that there is more time for the Australian and the Big Bash players to make it to this tournament. So a young 17-year-old left-arm spinner who's enjoyed success here, knocking over New Zealand's top order, will play against players like David Warner with all of that experience. And it should, in turn, I wouldn't say it's the reason why these tournaments are being played in Dubai, but an unintended and positive consequence is the UAE men's team should end up improving pretty quickly. Like, we know that over years that the more high quality cricket you play against high quality opposition, it tends to have an effect on your national team, and so it should prove for this UAE team, who are some chance of making it through to the next T20 World Cup as well. They have their next major qualifier coming up in October and November. That's the Asia qualifier as part of the T20 World Cup that's to be played in the West Indies and America next year. It's being played against, or in the hometown of their old rivals, Nepal. They had a couple of ding-dong battles against Nepal earlier this year, but they're a chance of making that tournament. And on the back of this, they might make life difficult if they get drawn in a weaker group.
The David Warner thing's interesting. He wants to play in that Sydney Test that finishes on January 7. He's a Sydney Thunder player. They signed him for 2 years last summer, so in theory he's contracted to them. They play on January 8th, and they play 4 games after that Test match before the finals start. So assuming they make finals, they could be playing up until January 24th. Yep. And then the ILT20 starts on Jan 13, but goes through to Feb 12. So even if he played the full Big Bash, he could still play 6 or 7 games maybe in the ILT20. I wonder if he'd be playing a Big Bash match 24 hours after wrapping up his Test career. It'd be a sign of the times. But it's curious what you're saying about the UAE development of players. I mean, there's not much opportunities. So I was looking at these squads from the previous season, 23 to 24 players across each of the squads. Some of those available for part of the season and not for the other part, and some of they were replacement players for those who'd left and so on. So there were 3 to 4 UAE players out of the 23 to 24 in each squad. And in most of the 11s, there was only one UAE player playing. I read reports that it was supposed to be 9 international players, but a lot of them had 10 playing, and only one UAE player. Occasionally there was 2. So, but even that one spot, those 2 spots could have an effect, because you look at Mohammed Wasim, he was 4th in the comp for runs, for instance, in that ILT20. So there were only 3 UAE players in the top 50 run scorers. But there were 3 UAE players in the top 14 wicket takers, so they did a little better with the ball. There were 7 in the top 50 wicket takers. So maybe the opportunities are very small, but for that absolute handful of players across the 6 teams, it could still be a useful developmental tool.
And credit to New Zealand as well, right? Like, they don't need to be in the UAE at the moment playing a 3-game T20 series. It's not as though, T20 is the format that sides are honing in on right now with a 50-over World Cup around the corner. They're doing their bit to develop the UAE. It's not their full-strength best first 11 team. They'll be featuring in England starting on the 31st of August. They've got 4 T20s followed by 4 one-days in the build-up to the 50-over World Cup that starts, I think, on the 4th of October. So, New Zealand, who have been the beneficiary of player movement and the transient player market, and you mentioned Mark Chapman before from Hong Kong, where he was playing until a couple of years ago, and that's the easiest place to move as far as other senior full member nations. If you want to play and you want to move, then New Zealand is not a bad way to do it. So yeah, they're giving something back there, and hopefully this provides an incentive to other countries that when they're darting around the world trying to get ready for major tournaments, they might see the UAE as a worthwhile destination.
India getting ready for the World Cup. Jasprit Bumrah's back. That's the big news there. So they're 2-0 up in the 3-match series against Ireland at Malahide. They're playing T20 games there. Won the first on Duckworth, Lewis, Stern, and then won the second. But it was Bumrah's bowling that was the story, really. 2 for 24 in that first game. He got Andy Balbirnie out. Second ball, got Lorcan Tucker out in the first over of the match. Got Balbirnie again in the second match of the series, 2 for 15 that time around for Bumrah off 4 overs. So there was a lot of lack of surety about whether he'd be able to contend for the World Cup. They haven't announced a World Cup squad, India, but they've announced an Asia Cup squad, which is sort of their last play in the sandpit as far as selection goes before they have to whittle it down to the 15 for the World Cup. And
it feels quite important. So Ajit Agarkar spoke to this today, and that's unusual to sort of have a selector speaking to the Indian squad. And it is a story of players returning from injury. So Bumrah with the ongoing back problems, KL Rahul with the thigh muscle tear that's kept him out of all cricket since the IPL. Shreyas Iyer with Shagger's back that saw him finish up early in the Border Gavaskar. Hasn't played at all since, I don't think, Jeff. He had surgery in May in the UK. So these players coming back, the most important is Bumrah, 2 for 24 in the first game, 2 for 15 in the second. Balbirnie did make runs, by the way, in that second T20. He's given up the captaincy of the T20 side to Paul Sterling since we interviewed him in June, but yeah, he made 75 from 51. So it was a closer result for them. The first one was a bit of a lottery with the rain and DLS and all the rest of it. But yeah, I guess any trepidation that India might have had around Bumrah will be dealt with via that. They've got Sanju Samson in the Asia Cup squad as cover for KL Rahul. They don't expect he'll be right to go straight away. So the Asia Cup also starts on the 31st of August, where India are playing in Sri Lanka, but Pakistan are playing in Pakistan, and never will the roads meet until, I guess, the pointy end of the competition. That was the compromise struck when... Was it originally that Pakistan were refusing to go to the World Cup, at least, as far as the posturing was concerned, and India was saying they wouldn't participate in the Asia Cup, but as ever, these things all get sorted out in the end.
From memory, Pakistan was supposed to host the Asia Cup, and India was saying they wouldn't go, and Pakistan was saying in that case they wouldn't go to the World Cup.
Right, there you go.
I might have that wrong, but that's
no, that feels about right. So, other noteworthy points in the Asia Cup squad. Surya Kumar Yadav keeps his spot, having done poorly in the West Indies one-day internationals. Hardik Pandya is still there. Vedra Chahal's been dropped, so the wrist spinning option for India for the World Cup looks like it'll just be Kuldeep Yadav, and they're using the 2 left-arm all-rounders, so Jadeja and Akshar Patel, but no Ashwin. And no Washington Sundar. So, I mean, talk about sport for choice. I mean, India's World Cup squad's going to be an absolute beauty. But, yeah, it feels like we have a much better idea now of what their selectors are thinking. And now they've got those 3 first-choice players back from injury. Well, home World Cup. It's been won at home the last 3 times. India in 2011, England in 2019, and Australia in 2015. So they'll go in, regardless of form, they'll go in as the raging hot favourites.
It's funny that those 3 countries should be the last 3 ones to host the World Cup. Just funny how things pan out sometimes. Australia making some changes to their one-day T20 squads as well. This is interesting. So you talked with Daniel about the fact that Labuschagne would be captaining Australia A in 50-over cricket. Well, not anymore, because he's replacing Steve Smith in the squad to go to South Africa and play first team 50-over stuff. Smith apparently has a hand injury. Mitchell Starc has a groin problem, so he's not going. That means Spencer Johnson will stay on. He was in the T20 squad, but he'll stay on in the 50-over squad for Starc. Mitchell Marsh will captain the ODIs as well. Pat Cummins is going but not playing. What's the deal with this?
I think this is fine. I think this is just like having Cummins with the group ahead of a World Cup. So Mitch Marsh is going to captain, but Cummins with his own hand injury. Remembering that this hand injury was obtained at the very start of the Oval Test match, and Cummins played throughout the 5 days encumbered by that. But yeah, the Smith injury, I don't think we knew about. I feel like we haven't talked about it at the very least, and it was dropped in. But I reckon that presents a great opportunity for Labuschagne. Like all these one-day matches in South Africa. If he were to do well there, like I don't think he'll leapfrog Smith, but like you couldn't rule it out because it feels like there'll be room for one of them, right? Like there'll be a Labuschagne or a Smith sort of gluey, anchory kind of slot in the 15 or even in the 11. But in all probability, they won't have a backup anchor. Like they'll have backup all-rounders, they'll have a backup spinner, backup quicks, but you wouldn't have necessarily two players or one player on the bench for a role that could be played by somebody else. Like we saw in 2019, they had Marsh on the bench for Kawaja in that role, for example. So, but yeah, I guess this is a great chance for Labuschagne to stake his credentials in the country where he made his one-day international 100. It feels like a long time ago now, in the weeks before the pandemic, back in the town where he was born. So, yeah, he's into the team. I watched Spencer Johnson bowl in a 100 game last week. He just looks like an international bowler. I watched a lot of him on the streams towards the end of last year's Sheffield Shield season. We know that he came within an inch or two of getting picked for the Ashes squad. As an extra fast bowler. According to a report I read, he was put on standby for the Ashes squad for the 5th Test match at the Oval. Maybe that was publicly known, and I wasn't as sharp to this information as I should have been. But it gives a sense of where he's sitting in the pecking order. And yeah, if they're going to have a spare quick for the World Cup in India, a left arm option with Starc might not be a bad one.
I think Steve Smith will get the Steve Smith card to play, even if Labuschagne makes 900 runs in that series. I don't think there's a selection panel that's going to leave Steve Smith out of the World Cup squad. And more shifts with the fixture, of course. Nagaraj Golapudi from Cricinfo has been the busiest guy in the world over the last 3 months, just reporting on World Cup fixturing. So Hyderabad this time, this is the 3rd city where the police force has kicked up a fuss and said, we can't handle security for a Pakistan game. So they've got back-to-back matches on the 9th and the 10th of October, which they're requesting to move now. It's the Pakistan-Sri Lanka game on this occasion, and the local police force are not happy there. Tickets still aren't on sale. We've got another, 4 days at the time of recording before the tickets go on sale. But just as well, why would you buy a ticket when you've got no idea when the game will be?
Yep, it's all been said by us already on the podcast in previous episodes that this is a symbol of where this World Cup's at. I thought it was instructive that the Hyderabad Cricket Association was seeking permission from the BCCI about rescheduling those games on the 9th and or the 10th. It wasn't about seeking permission from the ICC because we know that it's not the ICC who are in charge of this particular tournament. It'll be their events business that coordinate on the ground, I'm sure. But really, the power around this particular 50-over tournament lies wholly and solely with the BCCI, and thus that's where the scrutiny should lie when it comes to these very late schedule changes, which, if it were in any other country, would just be laughed away. But the fact that it's this tournament at this time, you just kind of shrug your shoulders and go, well, that's just the way it's going to be. And you couldn't rule out this being the last change either.
And the ICC Cricket World Cup mascots got released this week with some EA Sports 1998 animation. And I'm sure it's just a pure coincidence, that they seem to have a link to the ICC's program of trying to sell NFTs to people.
Well, it jumped out at me off the press release, right? So where these mascots come from, apparently, is a place called the Cryptoverse. Yes, and what a coincidence, Deirdre Chambers, that cryptos are the ICC's NFT business. So it doesn't say explicitly in the media release that these are related to the cryptos that they've been hawking in the last 12 to 18 months, but I mean, it feels like a matter of time before those two threads are tied together, doesn't it? I mean, where even the video they put out with the info, I think the punters are being, people are being asked to nominate names or something ridiculous, but just the imagery used with them, it does feel like we're trending down the path of this being another way of making money through the NFT caper, which, we've had our say on that before, but it does feel like a slippery slope, and in 5 or 10 years' time, I think we're going to laugh at how much money that cricket's collected from this part of the, shall we say, this part of the internet, this part of the metaverse, or however you want to frame it. But it doesn't feel like this is a coincidence.
This part of the broader ecosystem of suckers and the gullible and people, including a bunch of people who probably can't afford to be being ripped off in that particular way. We'll come back to the ICC Hackathon a bit later in the show, but before we get to the break, we have to have ourselves a little bit of Nerd Pledge! Nerd Pledge. The game that we play with the nice people who listen to this show who decide that they want to support it in practical terms. They do this. They send in donations, contributions in amounts that correlate to a cricket number, and we have to work out what the number means. Our Nerd Pledge comes from Randolph Brazier, who I met at the Oval during, maybe it was the World Test Championship final. One of our listeners who I caught up with to say good day and sit and watch an hour or so of play in the field. It is £2.46, so the number is 246, and there's a clue attached.
Cool. Yeah. How did that go? Yelling out your window in Lisbon. Nerd Pledge was it? Give me a sense of who you're. What does it look like out the window?
It's sort of apartment buildings, and then you can look down to the water. But there are a few different people yelling out all kinds of things at different points of the day or night at the moment. So I don't think my contributions really stand out in any way.
Okay, noted. Randolph's clue for you, Jeff. Love your work, guys. My Nerd Pledge of 246 for the best duck you'll ever see in the field.
Well, there was only one place that I wanted to go with this, Adam, and it is about the best duck that you might see on a cricket field, notably Plucka Duck, a duck that we've talked about many times before, for playing in the Dean Jones testimonial match in 1994. Now, I wanted to say, when I started looking for evidence of this, it is very hard to find as the years go by. And I mean, having spent a bit of time travelling around Italy and so on the last few weeks and looking at archaeological sites and so on, there's information loss. With each generation that goes by, information is lost. And I feel that maybe Plucka Duck is like some stone tablet where the runes are slowly eroding away. There's less and less to be found. The scorecard in particular is no longer in existence. It used to be out there on a website called cowboyhat.com.au, and sadly, whoever was running Cowboy Hat hasn't paid their hosting rights because the URL's been hoovered up by somebody to try to be resold. We've
got to get it back. I mean, I reckon. If I recall correctly, this scorecard was a copy-paste job from the newspaper the following day, which meant on the card, which I have seen with my own two eyes, it read P Duck to denote that Plucker had both bowled and batted. So if we got the microfilm out, and went down to the State Library, we will be able to find the scorecard from the Dean Jones testimonial match, and we can, on the Final Word webpage, host this scorecard. It's the least we can do.
I have had a dig through the 94 papers that I could find via the online archive and found some match reports, but haven't found a scorecard as yet.
Okay.
If you don't know about the work of Plucka Duck, perhaps if you're in the UK particularly, it was most of the time allegedly Mark McGann was the TV producer who was in the duck suit on the show Hey Hey It's Saturday, which had a checkered record over the years. But it did heavily feature a man in a duck suit running around doing stupid things. He was, in 1997, nominated for the most popular comedy personality at the Logies. You had Patrick Bramwell on for his Logies tilt a few weeks ago. And it's a fictional character. It's not a personality, but
fair enough.
A duck suit was...
Yeah, Plucka Duck was a gem. Do you remember the music?
Can't say I do.
What was it? Plucka duck, not a chicken or a cow. Plucka duck right here, right now. And then they'd spin the thing around, and he'd grab. Right. You know, if you're the punter, you'd pull the duck off, and you'd the smaller duck, that is, the replica pluckers, and you'd find out what you'd won. You could win the Nissan car, couldn't you? That was the whole thing.
I can tell you about the wheel, the spin the wheel that Plucka used to have. The wheel was rescued from Sunshine Tip. Sunshine is a suburb in Melbourne. In 2003, there was a news report about a fifth-generation carnival worker named Charlie Miller happened to be out at Sunshine Tip as the wheel and other assorted Channel 9 props were getting the heave-ho. Charlie said, I was there dumping a load of rubbish when I saw this bunch of guys unloading a whole lot of unusual stuff from a truck. There were these sets that looked like they were the inside of a spaceship. Don't know what that was all about, but after they'd pulled out, I wandered over and grabbed the wheel. He held onto the wheel for several years and then later put it up for auction. I don't know what it fetched, but I know that if you had known about it, Adam, you would have been...
Bloody hell. I was going to say, had I known about it, I'd have Plucka's wheel now. There's almost nothing more on brand than me buying Plucka Duck's wheel. I spent quite a lot of time talking about Plucka Duck with Greg Baum from The Age.
Of course you did.
Gilly and I don't think Brettig was there. Gilly and I interviewed Bormy about the 93 Ashes for the greatest season that was 93. The context was that they were sending, getting at the perspective of being on the 93 Ashes, but trying to follow the 93 footy season. And they were sending videos back to England on tour, and they would have like footy nights where they would watch games from like 3 weeks before on the VHS on the, they'd put them on the projector and all the rest of it. But on that trip, Trevor Marmalade and Plucka Duck came out, and I think it was
they
Trevor
were there,
Marmalade.
They
came out.
Trevor was there,
and they Plucka Duck was involved in one of the tour games. I don't think he was on the park itself, but they did like segments and so on. What an absolute junket that would have been for what would have been like 3 minutes of television, getting to spend multiple weeks on an Ashes tour.
Yeah, well, you can find, if you dig around, the clip of Plucker jumping the turnstile at Lord's and running in wearing a jacket and tie, and you can also find the clip of him going into Australian training and facing Merv Hughes and belting him over square leg with a hook shot.
Yeah.
So clearly Mark McGann could handle a stick. Wasn't completely out of place on the cricket field. So when he rocks up for this game, and I should say, in looking around for this, I also found there's actually a website called heyhey.tv, which is run by whoever owns all the footage these days, Summers, Carroll, or whatever the production company is, where they have a membership structure. Get this, they say, create your account, membership from $6.95 a month or $59.95 a year, unlimited viewing, all new content added regularly. What new content are you adding from fucking Hey Hey It's Saturday?
Who's paying $60
$7 a month?
$60 a year to watch Hey Hey clips. The show finished 24 years ago.
It's $7 a month,
and that's sad.
Netflix
and it is sad that Hey Hey ended.
$7 a month. Like they're at least making some new stuff for you. Like,
I want to know that the profile. When like companies try and work out what their median customer looks like, what is the median customer, or the profile they can pull together demographically of someone who spends $59.95 a year for unlimited access to a Hey Hey It's Saturday archive?
All I know is the list should be forwarded to the AFP. That's all I can put together. So that exists. That's a thing that had I had a bit more research time today, I probably would have signed up for it as a final word business expense just to dig around and find what was in there. We might come back to that on a future show. But I did find the Sports Tonight highlights with Tim Webster about the Dean Jones testimonial in 94. So 40 over match at the MCG. Nearly 30,000 people came to watch this game, Adam. 30,000 people put money down to come through the turnstiles. Maybe some of them are signed up to heyhey.tv. And look, they got a good game. The Allan Border 11 make 285. Dino, direct hit, run out of Matthew Elliott to start things off. Just play the hits, Dino. Jamie Siddons makes 74. He can really play at that time. Border plays, makes 42. Jason Dunstall, your mate, makes 48.
And I remember they were doing updates on the ABC. I don't know where we were that afternoon, but I was with my parents in the car. And we were, as I think it would be quite relatable. You listen to the ABC updates from Sheffield Shield games and all the rest of it. Well, they had someone doing. Well, you and I have both done them, haven't we? For the updates
round the grounds,
round the grounds, exactly. With the galloping gasometer at VFL Park. But whoever they were doing, and we were like willing Dunstall to 50, as you would, right? But yeah, dismissed 2. I think he was out leg before for 48, is my recollection. Anyway, Dunstall could play.
Well, he gets dropped off Carlton full forward Stephen Kernahan at deep square leg by Gus Logie. Gus Logie puts down Dunstall. And then comes on to bowl and bowls Doug Walters, who's also playing. They got Dougie out in 1994. He probably wasn't in peak condition. But so Siddons is doing the business. Merv Hughes takes a screamer at backward square leg. And off Greg Ritchie, I think. And then he's fielding literally in the crowd for Jamie Siddons, who's hitting sixes. So Merv jumps the fence and runs up and stands among the punters who love that, obviously. Gary Ablett Sr. is playing. Would be odd if Junior was playing in 94, I suppose. So he would have barely been born. Gary Ablett Sr. gets Jamie Siddons out, caught by Footscray champion Doug Hawkins. So it's a very footy cricket crossover here. Doug Hawkins immediately gets hugged by Plucka Duck, who's fielding for the Jones team. Ablett also gets David Hooks out and then takes 2 blinding catches off Allan Border and Rod Marsh. How is it if you I know life didn't turn out particularly well for Gary Ablett Sr. In terms of the between the ears stakes, but you couldn't deny natural athleticism, the ability to just rock up in a game like that and dominate actual top line cricketers.
Bring back the testimonial game. you know, the 90s was such a rich time for these. There was the Dino game you're referring to there with all these footy stars playing, you know, Jeff Fennick, Molly Meldrum, you name it. You know, it was a grouping of pop culture. It was a grouping of Melbourne interests, celebrities, you might say, with a couple of other star cricketers from other states. We had famously the Alan Border testimonial game with Fatty's catch.
I'll tell you what, Gary Ablett's catch, the second one off Rod Marsh, Gary Ablett dives forward full length, scoops it in and lands on his face while holding onto the ball. That is a hell of a lot better than Fatty's catch. Fuck Fatty's catch. Gary Ablett's catch outdoes that by the length of the straight.
I reckon that was in front of the big scoreboard as well, when there was such a thing as big scoreboard and small scoreboard at the MCG, out towards the Ponsford stand goals. And, you know, like the Ian Healy testimonial match was when Pat Rafter hit Courtney Walsh for multiple sixes. There's the David Boone testimonial where they broke up the match into allotments of 25 overs, so 25, 25, 25, 25, which, as we know, later got adopted by, was it the Ford Ranger Cup, what Mercantile Mutual turned into some years later? So that was a thing for a time. There was a Ricky Ponting one down at Launceston, but it wasn't televised. When the next Australian great who retires, we should be advocating for a testimonial match, including a bunch of footballers. That's all I'm saying.
Well, there were a bunch of footballers playing here, and Plucka Duck was out there again when Dino went out to bat. I don't know what Plucka was doing. Was he fielding for the other side at that point? But he runs out and gives Dino a stuffed Plucka Duck, which Dino promptly hits away. I also read in a Steve Waugh biography that they used to, on the 93 tour, they used to give a stuffed plucker to whoever had most recently made a duck in the Australian team, who had to carry it around with them until they got to hand it on to the next person. So there was a very strong Plucka Duck theme. There was a cultural thread running through Australian cricket at this time. Dino, 50 off 38 balls, out for 58. Dermot Brereton takes the catch, your other favourite, and gets booed roundly by the crowd for doing so.
Final word guest, Dermot Brereton.
Yeah, final word guest. Dermot Brereton drops David Gower, who makes 78 not out. Gus Logie makes up for his shelled catch by making 81. Gary Ablett Sr. hits the winning runs. And as you say, Molly Meldrum's on the field at one point. Jeff Fennick's running around. Plucker's bowling was not featured on the tape, so I can't find that. If you can find the scorecard, let us know. It could hold the key to the 246 for Randolph Brazier, but it might also just be a simple typographical error that Dino's team won, making 286. Could that be about the best duck that we ever saw on the field? Let us know, Randolph.
Plucka Duck, not a chicken or a cow. Thank you, Randolph. We're going to take a break. On the final word, on the other side of it, we've got a lot of women's cricket to get through.
This is the final word with Jeff Lemon and Adam Collins. We were talking about the UAE cricket team earlier. Well, the UAE women's team are one player fewer after Mahika Gaur was poached by England. She qualifies for England. She's into the England squad at the age of 17. Super tall left armour, swings it. You've heard Adam rhapsodise about the potential that this player has from watching her bowl at the Fairbreak tournament. Lived in England until she was 8 years old, hence she's available to play for England. International debut at the age of 12 for the UAE, so she'd have to be up there. I know the record holder off the top of my head is 12 years and 70 days maybe for Pakistan, because I was looking at that in relation to Kim Garth, who once held the record for being the youngest. There have been several younger players since, but so I don't know where on the number of days Mahika Gaur sits for the UAE. But anyway, she's in the England squad to play against Sri Lanka in the next few weeks.
I just want to say off the top that I really do respect the view of Andrew Nixon, who's been a guest on the show before, and others like that who find it difficult to be thrilled about this. In that it's great for English cricket and it's great for Mahika that she can play for England, but also it does weaken the UAE team. She is going to be, if not the best, one of the best bowlers in the world. Imagine what her career could look like, what she could do for cricket in the UAE had she stayed the whole way through. But here's this prized opportunity to play for England, and so it plays out. She's been at school this year on scholarship. She's been in the setup in Manchester for a couple of years now. She's shown enough with moments for the originals and in the Rachel Hayhoe Flint, and they made it to the Charlotte Edwards finals this year, the Thunder. So it all makes sense in the context of looking forward to the future. And it's an important part of this England squad, right? So Bess Heath also gets her opportunity. That's not necessarily about, this Sri Lanka series that's coming up, although she did play well against Australia A. It's about, where does Bess Heath fit into the England setup in sort of 2 or 3 years' time, or maybe even next year's World Cup, right? So she's been part of the Diamonds team that won the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy last year. She made an important 40-odd in that Lord's final. She's averaged in the 40s this year in domestic cricket. She's got a great pair of gloves on her, but she's not going to keep here because Amy Jones is there. But they'll get her in the side. She'll get some games for England. Hypercourse, who we cite a lot on the show, he made an interesting observation through all this as well, because there has been criticism of the, not omissions, but the resting and rotation that's going on here. So we're seeing Eccleston and Dunkley missed a lot, all of these Sri Lanka games. Sivabra is missing the T20s. Danny White's missing the one-dayers. Some criticism is, well, you're not showing Sri Lanka respect. But the other side of this is that there's kind of no other way to get games into players other than getting games into players. And you've got to pick the right time of the cycle. You can't play speculative picks 5 minutes before a World Cup. And the truth is, the next Women's World Cup is only 15 months away or something like that when we go to Bangladesh late next year. So there's a very small window here. They couldn't do it in the Women's Ashes. That wasn't realistic. But they kind of can get away with it here. And I understand that it doesn't necessarily show complete and thorough respect to Sri Lanka. But if you're England, you're not as worried about that. You're worried about your own interest. And your own interest is seeing whether Mahika and Bess Heath can step up and play. And this seems to be a timely and clever way of doing it.
Well, there's also the comment, the riposte of well, why are they being rested if they're going to then go and play the WBBL? Well, because the WBBL is probably the best professional development environment that players can have. And if they can get picked, they get a long stint of games. They get a couple of months to really bunker down in a team. They get to swap notes with other players from different places around the world. It has been the key part in making so many players, taking them up the rungs in terms of their own performance. So that isn't something that you want to miss out of in favour of playing in the same international environment that you've just spent the last few months as part of. Changing that up and having that variety is likely to be more beneficial for your more established players than making them just go through the motions of playing endless bilateral cricket.
Yeah, and there's also a similar argument that runs at how can you rest someone like Sophia Dunkley or Danny Wyatt who played in the fair break, right? So, why can they be fresh enough to play fair break in, I think we were there in April, it might have been May, something like that, start of the season, and not be fresh enough or ready to play a tournament or a bilateral series in September? Is there a disconnect there? Well, the truth is they're able to make good money in 2 weeks of work, right? So they can manage the situation. None of these players are going to fair break without consulting the ECB. They've got to get their NOCs. They've got to have conversations up the chain. This would have been planned out months in advance. And Eccleston has played next to no domestic cricket this year, but her workloads have been through the roof because she bowled a shitload of overs in the test match, and they're going to India later this year and playing another test match, and guess who's going to do the bulk of the bowling there? S. Eccleston. So it's not all one, it's not one size fits all. It's like with men's cricket, we accept this as part of it, that you see players rested strategically and at times that works in keeping with the cycle, and this is just another step in the direction of women's cricket being more like the men's game and that professional model becoming more repeatable. And I'm not saying all of those things are good, but this is that. This is an example of that.
Even if they hadn't played fair break, these players would still have been candidates to be rested because it's about a mental break as much as a physical one. After playing an Ashes series, which is has more hype, more attention. It is a different level of intensity. The actual workload in fair break, which only takes a couple of weeks and is a number of short games, isn't that intense to begin with. I don't think it would have made a difference if they had or hadn't played fair break. That wouldn't have come into consideration at all.
Improbable, you're right. They play 6 games of T20 cricket, and yes, I share that view. The other grievance is that Tammy Beaumont's not selected after making a century for the Welsh Fire.
Can I jump in on this? Because this, this irks me. This is bullshit. This is the most recency bias kind of thinking in terms of cricket. Well, she just made some runs. She just made 100 in the 100. Okay, cool. The 100 is not the highest possible standard of cricket going around. There are good players in it, and there are some other players who are making up the numbers at various points. That's not necessarily a defining argument. But B, Tammy Beaumont has had a decade of being not very good at T20 cricket. Now, that is not to say that she can't improve and that she can't challenge for a spot and that she can't lay down a case to do so. But a few weeks of good cricket is not laying down that case. That's not how it works. You don't, on the basis of a couple of performances, get to say, oh no, she's clearly switched gears, leveled up, whatever your cliche is, kicked it up a notch, bam. Because who knows? That there's no conclusive evidence for that. You need a stronger evidence base to be able to say, like, this player has had umpteen opportunities for years and years and years and years, and she's a terrific player, and I loved watching her I watched every ball of her double hundred in the test match, and it was a thrill. She's terrific in 50 over cricket. She has always struggled to have quite the scoring rate required in T20 cricket. She's never been quite fast enough, particularly at the top of the order where you need players to be able to take it on at a strike rate of 120, 130 plus and really push games along, and too often she's struggled to do that. It's perfectly reasonable that she's not in contention. They've given her the opportunity. She hasn't yet taken it. Let her make the case for a longer period of time.
Yeah, and look, she might end up playing in that role that she did in the 2020 World Cup. By that I mean the year 2020, when she came in as the number 6. Look, John Lewis, when he was asked about Beaumont, and to an extent Lauren Winfield-Hill, who's lost her spot in the squad as well, they kind of know what those players do because they are so experienced. So if they keep making their case at domestic level, if Tammy Beaumont goes and blitzes Sri Lanka, again, with respect to what Sri Lanka's doing, but let's keep it in perspective, there is a multi-speed economy in women's cricket, and the side that Sri Lanka field, in all probability, will be the equivalent in terms of standard of not even a domestic team in England at the moment. I wish it wasn't the case, but that's just the way things are. Now, if Beaumont dominates Sri Lanka, well, that's what she's expected to do. I think it's more important that Bess Heath gets a look. I think it's more important that they frame it up in terms of someone like Alice Capsey, where she sits at the moment, and getting more international games. I remember when Pat Howard was running the men's professional setup in Australia, spoke to him once about the optimal amount of games you want to get into a cricketer before a World Cup cycle. This will be that. And Beaumont is a fully known quantity. A little bit like Freya Davies as well. She's been left out, although with Davies it might be that they're just looking past her a little bit. I see that Lauren Feiler with an extra yards in both squads. Izzy Wong's in the T20 squad, albeit not in the one-day squad. Of course, we've already mentioned Mahika. It may well be that Freya Davies is viewed in a similar way that, well, we kind of know what she does. Let's use this as an opportunity to see some other cricketers. So Davies, by the way, is in that WBBL draft for overseas players. We saw a release come out overnight. Kate Cross is there as well in the draft. She hasn't played in the Big Bash for, I don't think it's been quite a few years, hasn't it? She played a season for the Heat
for Brisbane,
at the very start.
Yeah.
At the very start. I think she played one for the Scorchers as well. But so they're looking to get over to Australia during the winter. Pooja Vastrika from India, the hard-hitting all-rounder, is also in that list of names that came through from Cricket Australia. But a bit of a digression. But yeah, still, I wasn't like, I kind of viewed it as a worthwhile press conference, right? This is where you want to hear from the coach and hear their logic for each player. And the reportage I read of it and a couple of clips of audio as well, it all seemed fairly logical, and they will win all of those games against Sri Lanka. Again, I can't tell you how much I wish it wasn't this way, but we know, barring, they could simulate those games 100 times and England are going to win 98 of them. And if it works out a different way, I'll be the first to celebrate that. It would require Atapatu to completely dominate and take a game away from England on her own, and she could. But it's less likely than any other scenario at the moment, due to the gap that the higher paying nations are able to provide when you compare them to the teams lower down the rankings. So, yeah, this all seems like it's about next year's World Cup, not about what's happening through September in England.
Yeah, the longer time's gone on, the more it's underlined that. And we saw Atapatu destroy New Zealand on her own a few weeks ago, and it was magnificent to watch. But that's what it takes for Sri Lanka to overturn teams who are above them in the pecking order at the moment. The South African women's team, a fair bit of, the things, unsecured items sliding around the deck in rough seas at the moment. So Sune Luce, who wasn't formally full-time captain until after the World Cup final at home, because she was an interim captain initially after they'd pushed out Van Niekerk, becomes full-time captain 6 months later as they're heading off to Pakistan. She's not the captain anymore. Looks probably like Laura Wolfart's going to take over in that job, but she's also being referred to as an interim captain at the moment. So it's curious, it's complicated. Chloe Tryon's not going. She was formerly the vice captain. She's on personal leave and won't be on that trip. So there's a fair bit of, suggestions of discontent, you would say, which have been there in the departures of all of the high-profile players who've quit the South African women's team over the last year or so. Lizelle Lee, Dane van der Kerk, Mignon du Preez, Shabnam Ismail have all retired. Marizanne Kapp still floating about. We've had a watching brief on whether she's going to sack off the national team, or whether she comes in as captain for a period of time. But it looks like that might be Wolvaert to do it as Generation Next. But she's quite a sort of softly spoken, quiet. She's steely and determined, but she's not necessarily going to be the rousing leader of a group from our impressions of having spoken to her over the years.
Well, it's a mess. This started with Dane van der Kerk at the start of the year. They still make the World Cup final, nearly pinched the bloody thing. And since then, they lose Shabnam Ismail, who's showing through the 100 that she's still as quick as anyone in the game. She is retired because the system is not set up to let her earn the amount of money she could make on the circuit, and she's clearly not thrilled with the way things have been travelling in South African cricket. You touched on Chloe Tryon. She was the vice captain. So, they lose their skipper and their vice captain for this Pakistan series. And if Laura Wolvaert does take over, she's going to have to try and keep things on the rails. It seems so unnecessary the way this has played out. They've had the same coach for over a decade, and maybe that can lead to some frustrations. But they've just made a World Cup final, and Fidos Mundo, who's been writing about this, went into that inconsistency there, where CSA referred to Sune Luce as the interim captain, and yet Sune herself referred to herself as the full-time captain after the T20 World Cup earlier this year. Dane van der Kerk's been really forceful in her commentary around what happened off the field, and the dressing room having that divide in it. And I think she said only 4 players got in touch with her when she announced her international retirement, right? So there's clearly something going on beneath the surface in that dressing room. So, yeah, for a side that we followed pretty closely since I was going to say the 2017 World Cup, but before the 17 World Cup, really, we were really invested in the way they were going in the build-up to that tournament. That 6 years on from that, they've made 2 more another World Cup semi in Australia, and the World Cup final at home earlier this year, and the surge of enthusiasm around that team when they played that final against Australia. Compare that in February to now in August, and it beggars belief that they're in this situation. So let's hope that if it is Laura Wolvaert, that she can keep things as they should be, and maybe there'll need to be some off-field change to satisfy Sune Luce to even play, because if she's leaving the side as captain, you got to question, might she find herself wanting to leave the national setup as well in favour of playing on the T20 circuit? I don't know, but this is not ideal, far from it.
Well, most of their best players are in the 100 in England at the moment, where Shabnam Ismail's second on the wickets takers list, Marizanne Kapp in there at equal third spot as well. The Southern Brave, Welsh Fire, Northern Superchargers are all guaranteed to go to finals with a round to go. I listened to the show last week with some dismay as you and Daniel nominated us to take over chairing a 100 franchise. Apparently we're all Welsh now, and those at Wales should embrace us with open arms to run their operation for them. Am I misunderstanding something here?
Sadly, the phone call never came. I'm joined by one of Abs's animals. Which dog's jumping on me here?
This is
Hildegard. This is who Winnie. I don't know if it'll come up at the back of your shot here, Jeff. It might not. This won't work very well on the podcast, but it might if people are watching on the YouTube feed. Hildy was pals with Winnie when we were up here for the marathon earlier this year.
I can see why.
Hello, Hildy. What was I saying? Yes, the Welsh Fire. We did nominate ourselves to be prospective co-chairs, and then Daniel jumped in on that as well. I'm not sure what it's called when 3 people are chairing an organisation, but
they're still it's like every AFL club had like multiple captains for a couple of years there. They had like 6 co-captains. I don't think it worked out so well.
That's right. That's right. I remember when St Kilda had about 4 of them. But yeah, no call from the ECB, but open-minded. And this is following on from our friends at Tailenders being made the co-chairs of the Oval Invincibles. And that's a very high-profile club, plays at the Oval, fashionable club. Greg, Felix, very fashionable men. You and me, not quite so fashionable. Podcast, not quite so big. Cardiff, not quite so fashionable in cricket terms, and Wales being a smaller club. I think it works.
Yeah, the silent letter in the ECB is where we belong. Interesting stuff out of India as well. Harmanpreet Kaur, no regrets over what happened in Bangladesh. This is a quote from her, which I think is worth reading in its entirety. It's from the cricket paper. I will not say that I regret anything, because at the end of the day, as a player, you want to see that fair things are happening. As a player, you always have the right to express yourself and what you're feeling. I don't think I said anything wrong to any player or any person. I just said what happened on the field. I don't regret anything. Can I clarify? You don't actually have the right to express yourself if what you're expressing is maligning the reputation of professionals in the exercise of their duty by saying that umpires are cheats and corrupt, which is essentially the implication, whatever not saying that it was corrupt by virtue of being paid off, but that their decision making was deliberately erroneous in the match. That was the implication. That's a bizarre doubling down, but to be expected, I suppose.
Yeah, to be expected. And, it's like when you hear that, when you often hear people cite freedom of speech when they say something utterly outrageous in the public debate. Yeah, but that doesn't mean you're free from criticism and you're free from repercussions and free from consequence. And so it was for Harmanpreet after that disgraceful set of comments and the way she behaved against Bangladesh. And, we discussed it at the time, but I'm not surprised that that's Harmanpreet's position because, well, she's too big to fail. There's almost nothing that she could do that would see her get in any meaningful trouble for all the obvious reasons.
Yeah, and a player who I've loved watching bat over the journey, and that it doesn't fill you with any particularly good feelings, particularly when you're from the richest country going around playing against a country without anything like the same resources in Bangladesh. And to finish off the segment, heard you and Daniel speaking too about Metrobank fever, the new ailment that's sweeping the nation. He's got a bad case of it. You're catching one. You might be transmitting one to me down the screen. What's going on in the Metrobank Cup, which is the domestic 50 over comp in England?
Well, first things first, what a great tie in there. I think Metrobank just sort of fits better than, it just feels like a better fit than the Royal London Cup, which always felt a bit hoity-toity for me. Metrobank feels more, feels more belt and braces, feels more relatable. Like, the Metrobank are on your high street, right? Mm-hmm. The Royal London Cup, it feels a bit,
strawberries and cream.
Strawberries and cream, you've got it. Well put. But yeah, I think it's right that we give it a little bit of love. We're not going to go into great detail, but I do know that tomorrow being Tuesday, we're recording on Monday afternoon, is the final set of group games. Then we're into the finals and the grand final, which is at Trent Bridge. It used to be always at Lords. Used to always be at Lords, the one-day final. I don't know whether Trent Bridge, great ground, adore it. I think you should earn the right to go to Lords if you get to the 50 over Cup final. Anyway, that's on the 16th of September. Peter Hanscom was in the runs for Leicestershire to guarantee their progress. They're 7-1, Leicestershire, so they're in the mix to get promoted in the county championship. They didn't have a good campaign in the Blast, but they're making it count in 50 over cricket and having a decent run of it in the 4-day stuff. Also from Group A, Hampshire, Lancashire, Kent in the mix. Surrey have only won one game, and they're not helped by the schedule at all clashing with the 100 because, Surrey are a powerful club. We talk about them all the time. 13 of their staff are playing in the 100, which meant that they were so understaffed for the Metrobank game last week. They had to call Tom Laws back from the Invincibles to turn out. Otherwise, they couldn't have fielded 11 players without having to go into presumably non-contracted Surrey representatives. So I think with that, you can form the case for the 50 over comp in time being played in April and May. I'm not the first person to say this or advance this argument. I've written about it multiple times that you could play the 50 over comp in the cooler months. Aprils tend to be pretty chilly. It's more conducive to running around and playing 50 over cricket than having 3 slips in a gully when it's 2 degrees at Lords or whatever. And play that for the first month or so of the season before getting into the red ball stuff and having maybe some county championship clashing with the 100 when there are fewer cricketers who are pulled in two directions. Whereas white ball cricketers, if you're it's improbable you'd be a specialist 50 over player, right? It doesn't quite break down in that specified a way. It's white ball, red ball at this point. Anyway, I digress. In Group B, there's Warwickshire, Worcestershire and Gloucestershire, who are the top 3 at the moment. We've seen Ed Barnard making plenty of runs for Warwickshire, having moved over from Worcester. He's made 490 runs at 82. Privy Shaw made a big double 100 and then did his knee. He could have been a smoky for that India Asia Cup / World Cup squad that we discussed off the top of the show, but he's got a knee injury which sounds relatively serious, which he's acquired playing for Northamptonshire. And with the wickets, leading the way is Oliver Hannon-Dalby from Warwickshire, who's taken 23 of them, leading by 8 on that measure. Who I'm pretty sure he listens to the final word. He's engaged with a couple of things we've done over the years. So well played him. And having taken 14 wickets is Ian Holland, reality TV's own, the man who won a contract to be a Victorian rookie listed player all the way back in 2012. Still doing his thing for Hampshire as an all-rounder. 14 wickets at 13. At an economy rate of just 3.8, so playing beautifully for Hampshire, who are a chance still of making the post-season. So that's Metrobank fever. We might do more on that next week.
It is still the final word. It's still Jeff Lemon. It's still Adam Collins. Nothing about that has changed. What has changed is the world. The world is changing because the ICC Hackathon Part 2 is up, and it is about, Adam. I mean, when Part 1 happened, we said, surely they can't equal that again. Surely they can't match it, and yet here we are.
I just think about, having worked in comms, it's been a while now, but I used to. You feel sorry for those comms professionals who are commissioned with writing press releases like this, who are tasked with the job of trying to put into normal speak the message. And with due respect to our colleagues, whoever wrote this at the ICC, I don't think they've quite achieved their objective here. This might be geared more at those who might participate in the hackathon more than you and I, but it is a media release after all. And good luck trying to work out what this is exactly.
I would like to share this with our audience. I think it is worth the recitation. The ICC, with its official fintech infrastructure partner and leading real-time global payments platform, invites all cricket-loving technologists to revolutionise the sport through cutting-edge innovation as part of the Next In Hackathon, a unique platform that brings together technologists from around the world who share a passion for cricket. The second edition promises to be bigger and better, offering participants the chance to showcase their skills, collaborate with like-minded individuals, and contribute to the evolution of cricket in a digital age, culminating in the Hackathon final in India during the World Cup. Through this platform, technologists will have the opportunity to develop innovative solutions that can elevate high-performance training, enhance fan engagement, and encourage mass participation. What does that mean?
Well, first of all,
what does any of that mean?
Do we know when? I mean, it says it speaks to the final in India during the World Cup. So we know when this is. We don't know when the fucking World Cup games are going to be, but we know when the Hackathon final is going to be. We don't know what the Hackathon is.
But we know when it is.
But we have a good steer as to when it is. Mm-hmm. Now, just for the small matter of what the
when
fuck
are the
is
semis?
going on here.
The finals in India. When are the quarters? Is Arantxa Sanchez Vicario into the quarters? Who's in the round of 16?
Thomas Muster.
Yeah. Do we think, is Australia going to get out of the group stage? Will Sam Kerr's calf injury derail them at the group stage?
Who's getting bundled out? You can only ever get bundled out of a Grand Slam.
That's
Well,
true.
it sounds like you can get bundled out of the hackathon as well. I mean, as I say, it's a pretty hard gig to get, right? Working for the ICC and comms. You'd have thought that that's the sort of organisation that has a pretty rigorous recruitment process, and that's who I have sympathy with when I see something like this go out. Having written a press release or two in my time, that someone got forced to draft this.
There was another one. Cricket Australia had one about the HCL Tech, which is a company we've looked at before on this particular segment as well. Chosen up. I think they were
went HCL Tech the name of an episode at some point many years ago.
Yes, I think it was. I think the name of the episode was "Transforming Technology Through Technology Transformation," which is what they promised us that they were going to do. an episode we might have recorded with Daniel Norcross around a lunch table at some point many years ago. It's also a partnership that promises the implementation of new innovative technologies to improve the digital experiences of all those across Australian cricket, to take CA's digital offerings to the next level, including immersive digital experiences for fans, players, partners, employees and volunteers. And once again, what the tiny fuck does any of that mean? What are they doing? And I'd like to finish off with Nick Hockley's bit in they've re-signed their ASIC Steel, who've been doing the training kit. We share a passion for innovation and excellence in the high performance arena. The sincerity from Nick Hockley. Beautiful, beautiful stuff from the chief executive.
Jeff, you've dropped into our show notes here. You've got some fun umpiring stuff to talk about. I'm not exactly sure what this is, so over to you before we wrap up the show.
Let me explain this to you. This came in, of course, from Brian Withington, who readers of The Guardian over by over will know as the man who leads off the line just about every day with a reader email.
One of the kindest people I've come across on the OBO. He once sent me a Bangladesh World Cup top from 2019, and when it got lost in the post, he sent me another one, and one for Winnie when she was just born as well. So I look forward to Winnie being big enough to wear the Bangladesh away top from the 2019 World Cup at some point.
Go the Bangles. So this goes all the way back. This is an email I discovered that I hadn't noticed at the time, I think, and it was about when the Dutch were playing the Scots in the qualifier, the World Cup qualifier, where the Netherlands got through they had to chase a score before the end of the 45th over, whatever it was, in order to get past Scotland on net run rate. So if they won the match but took too long to do it, they still weren't going to qualify. So he lays it out in this way. The Dutch, they had to do it in 44 overs, I think, in order to be sure of qualifying. So they needed 278, and if they did it off 44.1 overs, they would have missed out. However, if scores were level at that point, and they got their score up to 283 by hitting, say, a 6 off the last ball, after 45 overs, they would have been ahead on net run rate. So if they'd reached the score just at the start of that over, then they would have fallen short on net run rate. But if they'd exceeded that score by the end of the over, they would have gone through. Right? You with me so far?
Yep.
Okay. So he says, basically, Scotland would have had an incentive to try to let the Dutch win off 44.1 overs as long as they didn't go past the score that they needed to chase. So if they made a higher score than the score they needed to chase, basically to deny them a boundary off the last ball. So if scores were level and they hit a boundary, even if they'd gone past the 44th over, they still could have gone through. And thus he posited that they could have done this by bowling deliberate wides or no balls that wouldn't have counted as part of the deliveries bowled. So say you come into that 45th over and you know that as long as the Dutch only make 278, they're not going to go through. But if they make, say, 282, 283, they will go through. You just feed them enough wides until you get their score in increments of one run up to the score that they needed to reach in order to win the match. They would have won the match but not qualified on net run rate, which is a quirk that I hadn't thought of. And he was basically asking whether this was something a team would have thought of doing or could have thought of doing. Your first impressions?
My first impressions is no, they wouldn't have considered it, because I just don't think that there's anyone in the dressing room thinking about this to such an extent. You can't. I don't think in a professional environment you can get yourself bogged down in thinking about the minutiae to this extent. So I don't think it would have been considered. Had it happened, it would have caused quite the brouhaha.
Oh, yeah.
My gut is that's probably fine. I mean, it's murky. It's grey area. My gut feel is that's probably fine. In the same way that was Trevor Chappell permitted to bowl underarm? Yes, he was. Of course it was, but as far as, I don't think there's a way you could strike it off. I mean, I don't think they would have had to have fronted the judiciary, whatever the equivalent is. They wouldn't have had to have they might have got a slap over the wrist from the media, but I don't think it would have changed the result. That's just my instinct, though.
Yeah.
Keen for your thoughts.
I suspect it would have been one of those immediate MCC rewrites of a law happening straight after this.
Right, yeah.
But the only thing that could come into relation to might be Law 42.2, which is fair and unfair play is the responsibility of umpires, which says this: the umpires shall be the sole judges of fair and unfair play. If either umpire considers an action not covered by the laws to be unfair, he shall intervene without appeal, and if the ball is in play, call and signal dead ball and implement the procedure as set out in section 18 below. Otherwise, umpires shall not interfere with the progress of play without an appeal. So umpires can unilaterally say that anything that's not specifically covered could be struck off, and the ball could be deemed dead if they deemed that. Yeah. So maybe the first wide you'd get away with, but once you bowled 2 or 3 in a row and they start to figure out that you're doing it deliberately, then they could start chalking those off. But I mean, that raises an argument about whether you could say this is covered by another part of the laws, therefore they don't have the authority to unilaterally intervene in that way. It's an interesting one anyway.
Yeah, nice one. The beauty of cricket is that it always throws up situations which might or might not contravene the laws, all down to interpretation, and I think that's squarely in that category.
All right, I think that is enough from us for this week. Well, you'll be doing a lot more stuff this week, but for this weekly show, this edition of The Final Word Weekly, as it has never been called, but I suppose could be. If you want to get in touch with us, support the show, patreon.com/thefinalword is the way to do that. And there will be plenty going on in Scotland over the next few days. If you're in that part of the world, drop Adam a line one way or another. You can find us on the internet and get in touch. There will be Final Word matches being played, all the rest of it. There'll be more episodes coming up in the feed, including the Scotland special and story time on the weekend. For now, that's enough. We'll see you next time.
Bye.